When you're lost in the darkness, look for the light. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the first ever episode of the ClickerCast, your weekly show where we round up all of the news and exciting breakdown from each episode of the brand new HBO show, The Last of Us. Based on the PlayStation video game from 2013, myself, Chris, alongside my fellow co-host Richie, will be getting together to dig into all the juiciness that is this fantastic brand new show. Welcoming my fellow clicker, Richie. How are you doing this evening?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing good. I've watched the show twice now for episode 1.
I have as well.
Fantastic, to make sure I was totally clued up. And of course, for anyone not familiar with the content here at Helix Plays Games, we round up lots of gaming news. Usually, this is our actual first show where we're not talking about video games. It's also the first show we're doing live, which is different for us. It's something a little bit off the beaten path, as we would say here on the channel, Richie. But we are here to break down The Last of Us. And I think before we get into it all, let's acknowledge all of the wonderful folks in the chat. I can see Cloud Validation's in there, Don's in there, Hungry Moogle, and a bunch of our other wonderful Helix heroes. And there are some brand new emojis for you folks out there as well. So if you do want to, we've got some clickers, we've got some fireflies. Feel free to spam the chat throughout with those kind of things. But yes, we are here to talk about the brand new show, of course, directed by Craig Mazin of Chernobyl fame, with executive producer and writer Neil Druckmann, famous for the video games, both The Last of Us, the Uncharted series, one of the head honchos over at Naughty Dog, and the fantastic music composed by Gustavo Santaolalla, once again from the video game coming across.
How many times did you practice his name?
You know what? I had to listen to his show early today to say how to pronounce the last part. But yeah, Santaolalla is there, and terrific job he does indeed. Richie, before we get into the thick of the show,
yes,
of course, we do plenty of content. As I mentioned, we do loads of gaming content here on the channel. If you are a big The Last of Us fan, and maybe this is the first time you've watched the show, you've not played the game, we do have a full playthrough of the entire Last of Us Part 1 on PlayStation 5 up now on the channel. So if you've got a taste for the show, if you've enjoyed it, maybe you want to go check out the free trial that's available on PlayStation right now, or maybe you're one of those backseat gamers who wants to just chill back with a drink and watch somebody else go through all the horrors and the pain that sometimes are death by clickers and runners. Go check that out over on Helix Plays Games right now. But before we dive into it, I'd like to get a little bit of an understanding, Richie, of what your history is with The Last of Us, where you're coming from, so we can tackle this show kind of with a perception of we know what we're talking about.
So I have completed The Last of Us Remaster on PS4 and The Last of Us Part 2 on PS5, once each.
Once each. Do you have the platinum trophies in either game?
No. There were games that I very much enjoyed my time with, but once I rolled credits, I was kind of also, okay, I was ready to move on, because they're quite stressful games, to be honest.
Okay.
They're not kind of like not quite relaxed. It's the situations. I mean, if you've watched the show, or played the games, you kind of get like the atmosphere, that tension that you're going under. I just never really had that much of an edge to go for the platinum.
Okay.
Or maybe it will in the future.
And have you read the prequel comic book American Dreams then?
No.
I've had a feeling you did not. But thankfully I have.
I'm going to be perfectly honest. I didn't know it existed until today.
Well, there you go then. So I've listened to the Last of Us podcast hosted by Troy Baker as well today to kind of prep myself. So we've got some inside scoops from the director and the executive producer at the same time. Of course, we do want to hear your opinions out there. So any questions that you do have or any points that you want us to mention and talk about from the show, feel free to drop them into the chat and we'll kind of bring them up as they come along as we break down the plot and we go through the actual episode itself. But let's start with some first impressions. We don't have like a news rigmarole like most of our shows, Richie. We just kind of go into it. So we will be breaking down the plot. This will be a spoiler-filled episode. By the nature of the actual, I guess, relation to the game, it will be spoiler-heavy for the game too. So if you've not played the video game, the game has been out for nearly 10 years now. So we might reference things without realizing it about the game and how stuff ties into maybe what we perceive to be the future of the plot, because the plot is out there.
Yeah, what I was thinking, to be honest, is we'll try and stick to what we see in the episode, but spoilers for both The Last of Us and The Last of Us Part 2 and any DLC and extended media is fair game.
It is fair game indeed, yes. So my history with the franchise, where I'm coming from, is you've got I've platinumed the original 2013 on PS3. I've platinumed just the once. I platinumed the remaster on PS4 the once. I platinumed The Last of Us Part 1 earlier this year when it came out in September, and I've got the platinum for The Last of Us Part 2 as well. And I have just finished this past week playing through The Last of Us Part 2 again, although it won't feed too much into this particular season of the show, as what we know. So quite well versed, I'd like to say, in what we do.
Yeah, I think there might be some. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a few like mentions or drops of little nuggets of information for them to build off a bit better with this being a TV show, and they know The Last of Us, the plot of The Last of Us 2, which they're clearly going to be working towards. But I think they'll stay fairly focused.
Yeah,
it'd be more Easter eggy stuff that are little things that'll to set up.
Absolutely. And I guess before we do dive into that, don't forget, folks, if you're watching at home, like, subscribe, click that bell so you're kept in the loop with all the great content we do here at Helix Plays Games, like our weekly PlayStation podcast or Xbox podcast and all of our other Let's Plays, live streams that often happen here on the show. If you are a big fan of it, it keeps you in the loop, of course. We do appreciate you doing that. And we do also appreciate our wonderful Helix heroes, the members of the channel who support us that extra little bit further from as little as 99p, who get early access to that very content. So, Richie, first impressions, we will go into the plot. That's the key thing I kind of want to do today, is break down chunk by chunk of the episode, how it goes into detail. But before we dive into that, first impressions, just overall views?
I thought it was fantastic.
Wow.
What about you?
Absolutely blown away by it. I know there was a lot of stuff going into it early doors about the early reviews of the whole season were coming out from kind of journalists and review websites. Really good praise. Being such a big fan of the video games, there's always that risk when you're adapting something that they change something.
Apprehension.
Yeah, there always is. And let's face it, the video game to cinema and TV has never been that kind when we look back at history. We've all if you think of Doom and the Assassin's Creed movies.
On that, I always think it's how video games tell stories is very different to how movies tell stories, how TV shows tell stories. The pacing's different, how you experience a story, because with a video game, through Last of Us Part 1 or Last of Us Remaster or just Last of Us, all three is actually the same game, you're playing the entire thing from Joel's perspective. So you are this like floating camera behind his head, seeing and experiencing everything he does. That doesn't necessarily work for a TV show. So there has to be some changes to flesh out stuff in a better way. And you can't just have a diary entry and just have a character stop there for 5 minutes and pull the book up to the screen.
Yeah. It doesn't really...
There's stuff like that. You have to find ways to convey that sort of information, that sort of background stuff without losing what makes it great.
Yeah. That's how I found it, is going into it knowing that it wasn't an adaptation, and we knew, I think Neil Druckmann being involved with it was the kind of the first big green tick for me that this show was going to be great, is that the guy who's pretty much seen the entire franchise from inception to reality twice over now with stellar video games he's got one hand on the wheel alongside Craig Mazin as well. And
he's kind of going, yes, you can change that. No, don't change that. That's important. He's got that influence.
Absolutely.
Which is what you want.
Absolutely. And he's very much on equal footing with the director on this one. If you listen to the Last of Us official podcast, there's a lot of conversations they have of actually how they met. And Neil Druckmann was a big fan of Chernobyl, and he'd currently been writing a movie script for The Last of Us, and it hadn't worked, and the rights apparently went off to a movie production studio. They reverted back to Naughty Dog a few years ago, and that was after he'd seen Chernobyl, and it was it was one of the voice actors from the video game, Shannon Woodward, I believe. She actually knew Craig, the director of Chernobyl, and she got them in touch, and him and Neil and Craig started going out for lunch and basically gushing over each other's project work. And Craig loved the video game, Neil Druckmann loves the Chernobyl series and all Craig's other television work. And it kind of seemed just like a match made in heaven, where they quickly became best friends, gushing over each other's projects. And then the rights were in the ballpark. Neil said the movie script it didn't work for a movie. It couldn't be adapted to such a short form piece of content.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I'm glad it's a series, not a movie, because we've basically seen an hour and a half. That's the length of a movie in the first episode.
Yeah.
And we've basically just started the journey.
Absolutely. So I think that was kind of a match made in heaven. And there's a funny story in that podcast when they say Neil doesn't know how television works, obviously. He said he's worked closely with some production companies, but not on the scale of like HBO in the States. And basically, because Chernobyl was such a big success, Craig took Neil over to a lunch meeting with HBO head honchos and said, this is my next project. This is what I want to do. And pitched the game while Neil just sat there and watched. This guy who's only knew for a year or two basically pitch his pet project, his baby, and do such a fantastic job. HBO just went, yep, okay, you seem passionate about it, go for it.
Because he's a fan of the game, so he knew the major story beats anyway. So he could have probably done that pitch without talking to Neil first. Probably.
Yeah, probably.
He could have just went, right, guys, I want to do this. I think the rights might be gettable. Here's my pitch for it. Get me in touch with Naughty Dog.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it's just kind of went from there to there. And I think that with the backing of HBO, I'm like you and me are both massive fans of Game of Thrones as well. And the sheer production value behind that entire series. Let's not get into that one here. But the production value of the show is second to none on television. There are no better CGI dragons out there in the world of TV. I'd actually argue the dragons at some point better than some television dragons you see. Movie dragons, sorry.
What I actually like about HBO is they've kind of just got rid of this idea where a TV episode needs to be 22 minutes long or needs to be 50 minutes long.
Mm-hmm.
It's as long as it needs to be to tell the story they want to tell.
Yeah.
Which I think must be great for a director for any given episode, because it means that you can just tell what you want to do without having these time constraints. So you're not cutting something important out just to fit an arbitrary run schedule. You're just going, you know what? This episode needs to be 70 minutes long.
Yeah, absolutely.
Next week's going to be 40 minutes because that's all we need.
Absolutely.
And I think that's good.
Oh, 100%. And I think with streaming services, we saw that with Stranger Things this year. Like some of their episodes were like just shy of 2 hours, which was a full-length movie. And
I think it started with Game of Thrones, actually. I think the first few series were all like an hour long, bang on. Towards the later half, it's just experimenting with the run times.
Yeah, and it makes sense. And for this show, we know, I think in the chat, Cloud Validation is asking, does anyone know how many episodes there are? There's 9 episodes for this series. Episode 1 apparently was supposed to finish around about the hour mark, and then they expanded it to basically create the world in a little bit more depth before we moved on to episode 2.
Yeah.
I do actually appreciate with HBO as well as they stick to this weekly format. They don't just dump every episode, because I enjoy things like Stranger Things and such, and I enjoy binge watching as much as the next person, but there is something to be said about having that week-long break to digest, enjoy, talk about it with people, and then get hyped up for the following week.
It's horses for courses for me. For something like The Last of Us, I want that week's anticipation. There's other stuff. I just give me it all now so I can watch it to my pleasure. But something like this, where you know this is going to be like talked about in the office and stuff, you kind of want that thing.
Yeah.
There, I think it's just figuring out for each individual show what is the best way to release it.
Yeah. I think sometimes when you're creating a world as well for television, is having that week for it to bed in, and you try and place things like where they are. I think if you watch 3, 4, 5 episodes back to back, you kind of start to quickly forget about what happened in the earlier episodes because you've binged so much of it.
It's the discussion around the office about, oh, did you see the show last night? What do you think's going to happen next? I can't believe they did that. They know that conversation's going to happen. They know there's people like us are going to produce podcasts around it and content around it, which keeps it people talking about, gets more people ideally drawn in to watch the show. Where if they just dropped it all in one go, this is probably a single podcast or something that we're doing rather than 9.
Yeah, it keeps the conversation cycle going in the marketing campaign. So you're going to get about 2.5, 3 months of people talking about how great the show is. On the flip side, you get an initial kind of 2-week burst when it's on everyone's kind of TV boxes, and then it kind of moves on and it's gone. And then you're waiting another 1.5, 2 years for the next series to start. And it's, again, there is something to be said about traditional television weekly episodic viewing. I think before we guess we will get into it with the plot. I just want to say, like, the actors and actresses, the casting, I think, for this whole show was phenomenal. Like, again, being a big fan of the video games, there's always that risk of they're not quite like the video game counterparts. Whenever you're adapting anything, whether it's like a movie that's had 3 or 4 iterations and you're making the 5th iteration because they've not had a version of it for 10 years, like inevitably, Richie, when they make the next Robin Hood movie in another 5 years and they have to recast everyone, you're always going to get those comparisons. With video game medium, it's exactly the same. But the difference is these are real life people, so you can't just cast someone who looks like their video game counterpart because they might not be the right actor for that role. Like there needs to be that flexibility.
I think when I'm looking at Pedro Pascal, I'm looking at Joel.
Mm-hmm.
Like very quickly, because he looks like Joel, kind of. So I think it's completely worked, and there's moments with Bella Ramsey where it's like that's straight up Ellie.
Yeah.
Like some of the way, I think it's the way she says "motherfucker" is like, oh, that was straight up Ellie. That was like 100% an Ellie reaction.
Yeah. And I can completely like there's some gripes out there, people saying they've cast people who don't look like the video game counterparts, but like at the end of the day,
I'd rather have a good actor who can act like the character rather than one who is a crap actor and looks like the character.
Absolutely. Like don't just get a lookalike in because they look like the video game character creator. I want them to be a great actor, and I think the list going into this was already good with, again, Pedro Pascal doing really good off the back of Game of Thrones, and he then went on to do The Mandalorian. He's done a bunch of other projects and movies in between. He's just having an absolute glow up over the last 5-6 years where he's just like the go-to, safe, reliable bet for TV. But backing that up with like Gabrielle Luna, Anna Torv, like Bella Ramsey again, she's only really been in Game of Thrones, and I think she was in another Netflix series earlier on this year.
She nailed it in Game of Thrones, though.
Absolutely, yeah, exactly. Just those short pieces really showed up in there. And I think, again, casting for HBO, it's been absolutely spot on so far. And watching them actually step into these roles and mirror the video game counterparts whilst putting their own spin on it has been exciting to see. Knowing so much that I do about the video games, what I'm loving about this show is it's filling almost like gaps that aren't revealed in the game, because as you said, you play as Joel, so you never get to see the conversations that happen with other groups or other people because Joel's not there in the room. You aren't there as the player in the room. With the series, they're able to just ping around and see random person on the street, random Fed agent, random conversation in the alleyway, because it all adds context. And I think that's what's really exciting.
An interesting way of providing context to some of the characters, some of the organizations, some of the factions in there, and the kind of morals of them. Mm-hmm. That like there's scenes that like it wouldn't make sense to be in a game because Joel wouldn't have witnessed it. Yep. However, some of these scenes are so powerful in the show.
Yeah.
There's one scene I'm thinking of. You know, the scene with the kid who just gets into the town.
Yep, we'll get to that. Yep.
That scene, everything around that little bit of story there wouldn't make sense in the game, but 100% sets up Fedra and who they are.
Absolutely.
And also who Joel is a bit.
Yeah, it adds a lot of context. So, Richie, let's get into the actual episode then. Let's break down the plot. I've got extensive notes about what happens, but if there is anything we do miss, of course, let us know in the chat down below. We'll talk about it and bring it up. Episode 1, When You're Lost in the Darkness, which, again, straight away, it's the beginning of the Firefly motto, so it's establishing that. I wouldn't be surprised if there's another episode called Look for the Light, like at some point further in this series. It's a nice play on the video game.
Probably the next major episode with the Fireflies in it.
Most likely. So we kick things off very, very happily, actually, not with the opening of the video game, something completely different. And we're in 1968, and we're with John Hannah from The Mummy, of all things. I saw his face, and I was like, what? And even my wife, who I watched it with, was like, is that John Hannah? I was like, I think it is, yeah, from The Mummy. Obviously, he's a lot older than he was when he did the Mummy movies with Brendan Fraser, but he gets a cameo, some kind of 1968 interview with two scientists basically talking about viral infections, pandemics, fungi, and such. And it really does just set the tone for what is coming in such a really clever way from a television standpoint. It basically is telling the audience what is to come 20 years before we even know it's about to hit. So as an audience member, you're hearing this guy talk directly to the camera about, LSD and penicillin come from a fungus, and there's these ants that are known to contract cordyceps viruses and sprout fungal infections, and it takes hold of their mind and makes them, essentially puppeteers them to do things they wouldn't have otherwise. And you can kind of see the audience back in the 1960s, like, kind of laughing it off. They're not taking it that serious, like, oh, yeah, of course.
Even the other scientist, the other virologist, he's like, it's never been seen in humans. It's like, yeah, but what if it happens,
Yeah.
if the conditions change, if the world gets a little bit warmer. So they've added global warming in there.
Yeah, which is
as
a
kind
nice...
of, it's a nice little way of, well, one, pointing out something. I mean,
we're all aware of it.
yeah, it's pointing a finger towards that. People should be aware of global warming, etc. But it's also setting up why this hasn't happened until the point where it does happen.
Mm-hmm. We all know mushrooms like to live in wet, warm, and humid environments. But what if the world starts to get it? You can't trust them damn mushrooms. But I really appreciate this from, again, this isn't in the video game, so this is adding context to the world. And I think for a brand new TV series, if you went straight into just trying to introduce Sarah and Joel and this family, you wouldn't have that context. But I think what this really does is it means all of the scenes that now happen in 2003 going forward, as a viewer, in the back of your mind, when things start to happen that seem a bit off, we remember that interview from 1968, and we're like, oh shit, it's happening. It's happening now.
This is covering information that you've read in like the diary entries throughout the game to gain that context as you're playing through the game, where as a TV watching audience, you need to kind of set that in people's mind now. So the kind of, when something happens in the show, I go, oh, that's why that we've heard about that. It's setting that up.
It is, and that's always the difference in the medium of television and movies, is that you as the audience member see things that the characters don't. Like, we know, it's the great horror trope. Like, the villain's at the window staring at the young teenage girl, but the young teenage girl doesn't, and that's where the suspense and the intrigue comes from, is that we see things they don't. But I just think it was, really clever, really well handled. And, talking about, like, the ants going crazy from the cordyceps, like, that is a real thing. Like, I remember, watching, like, David Attenborough's Planet Earth on the BBC when I was probably in my early 20s. And I used to love those shows for when TVs finally moved up to like 1080p and Blu-rays were a thing. That was one of my first Blu-ray sets I bought, because all those visuals they show from the Planet Earth documentaries, they make your new TV sing, Richie. Like, the colours pop, everything. Like, that is the one thing you want to show.
The production value in them is fantastic.
Oh, absolutely. And in one of those episodes back in like probably 14, 15 years ago, David Attenborough talks about this ant, and it shows you the ant gets the fungal spores on it, and it crawls up to the top of the canopy above the trees, and essentially the fungus grows out of its skull into this little fungus plant to get the sunlight to grow, and then spreads spores back down to the forest bed, and more ants get infected. And it shows you out. And if you can go look at the clips on YouTube, I posted it over on Twitter. It's like 4 or 5 minutes, but it's just like it's horrifying. And the fact that the scientists sat here saying, what if it jumps from animals to humans, or from ants to humans? And you're like, there's that element of it could happen, which adds enough fear to the rest of the show, which I think is a great setting scene.
Something like this already exists in the real world, just not in our species.
Yeah,
but things can cross species. It can happen. That little nugget just sets the tone. Absolutely.
And let's face it, elephant in the room, it just happened, right? Apparently it jumped from, bats to humans for COVID? Like, we as a society have just gone through a global pandemic, the first one in 100 years since the Spanish flu. So then a scientist talking about that, there is that reality of, oh, fuck, this is very close to home right now. And then it sets the tone so well. So, yeah, I think greatly delivered. I'm so glad that the director, Craig Mazin, actually fought to have this in, because apparently when he went to Neil Druckmann with this idea originally, Neil wasn't a big fan of it. And then he went back to him after they'd done some kind of pre-recording, showed him the scene again, and he was like, I love it, I get it. It's adding a lot of context to the world without showing us the characters.
This goes back to probably Neil not being a TV guy.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, now I've seen it, I get it.
Yeah, and back to that thing you mentioned with the little kid, I think this is where Craig, being a television director, comes in with his eyes and says, well, we need to add more context here. We need to show more detail here, but not through the eyes of our protagonists, through an ulterior motive, and that's what I think we get.
We need something to kind of pad it out to... what's the word I'm looking to kind of just
it expands the world, doesn't it?
Expand it, to make it feel a bit more fleshed out.
And I think it does a great job. And then cut to black. HBO goes all in Game of Thrones style on their animated introduction, What did you think of this? The fungal spores growing across the world, seemingly. It forms the shape of the map of the United States. I don't know if you picked up on that bit.
I did. My initial thoughts were kind of, oh, it's just another HBO intro. It looks cool, but it's just a HBO intro. And then when you start looking at the neat little details, like there's certain things where like spores kind of pop off, or like making up the US map, are like around major cities and population centers.
Oh yeah,
some of them which are critical for the game series.
Yeah.
So they say, okay, when you start to know some details, I go, okay, yeah, so you've done something really cool there.
Yeah.
But yeah,
the intro for me was like, as soon as it started, it was like, this is full on Game of Thrones. Like after the HBO static, I half expect to always go into the and it just instead it started playing the again Gustavo Santaolalla's music was just like, oh, this. I'm so glad they kept his composition in this, because it would have been so easy for them to go, oh, we need something different for the TV show, and just hearing those guitar acoustic beats. Yeah. While the spores are coming to life, seeing it rendered in like the best kind of spores you've ever seen, the fungus. It's beautiful.
I wouldn't be surprised if they had some conversations about the importance of the acoustic guitar for The Last of Us. More so Last of Us Part 2, to be fair, than Last of Us, the original one. But I mean, I have actually just played the opening of The Last of Us Remastered, and Joel's guitar is the...
Yeah. It's
one of them things when you first play through it, it's just a thing in his house.
Mm-hmm.
But after playing through The Last of Us 2, it's like, as soon as I saw it walk downstairs in the living room, I was like, I know how important that is.
Yeah, there's loads of, I'm sure there's like loads of Easter egg breakdowns that'll come out throughout the week, and that as we get Craig Mazin, the director, again was saying there's details that if you look for them and if you see them in the first few episodes, you will be rewarded later in the series for paying attention. So I'm looking forward to these things kind of going like, oh, that's from this, that's from that. I remember that, and just tying those things. Like again, as any television or movie enthusiast, Easter eggs are kind of what we live for in today's world. Like the comic book movies do it so well, and now this gets a chance to do it with the video games. But yeah, animated intro, fungus growing, forming the shape of what looks like skyscrapers. Again, very clever artistic choice. I think it forms like a skull of someone at some point, and then it kind of comes to a crescendo of what is clearly the silhouette of Joel and Ellie on this adventure, which is just, parent and child almost, out there in an infected world. And yeah, again, that musical beat, the tone playing over, absolutely fantastic. Get the title card, The Last of Us. Same font, same layout as the video game. They haven't gone with some crazy new design. And I'm just so glad they committed to it, because that was one of the things for me with the Uncharted movie they ruined. The Uncharted theme is one of the best action-adventure scores of all time. And in the movie...
I haven't seen that Uncharted movie. So they didn't go with the Uncharted theme.
So, again, this isn't about Uncharted, but it's Naughty Dog related. Yeah. So, and it's Sony Productions. They opted to use it like in a very brief moment when he kind of becomes Nathan Drake. They do use it for all of 20 seconds, but throughout the whole movie they opt for like pop and R&B music instead of this epic adventure score. And as a fan, it's like, just lean into it, use the soundtrack that is so epic in the video games. And I'm so glad that with The Last of Us they were just like, no, we are keeping with it. And we'll get into it, but there's parts through the actual episode where they use music from other parts of the game very, very clearly. And we'll get into that as we go on. Shout out to a few new people joining us in the chat as well. Sednar, I can see you dropping some fireflies in the chat. Meg's here as well. If you go check out Megatron's channel, she's currently just starting her Last of Us Part 1 series playthrough, which is fantastic. Can't wait to check more of that out. And Jin as well, one of our other fantastic Helix heroes, is in the chat too, folks. So thank you for stopping by. Don't forget to give that like a click.
I wouldn't skip the intros as well, because I can see it changing slightly every single episode.
Yes, like they do with House of Dragon and Last of Us. It'll tweak.
That is a HBO thing where they will tweak it. I imagine, especially when the spores come up to make Joel and Ellie, that might occur at different points across the map. Yeah.
Absolutely. And Meg points out, they did it with The Witcher as well. Yeah. So, you've got to keep a keen eye out for these little Easter egg things. But again, cut to black, Richie. The intro's over. We're here. I'm hyped as shit right now when I'm watching this show. I'm like, yes, it's a game that I love so much, and I've been talking with people about for so long. And in my mind, knowing that like my brother, who is a gamer as well, but not as big as a fan as I have, and like my sisters and her boyfriend's going to check it out, and then my mum and dad are going to check it out, and there's just friends in our friend circle who maybe haven't played the game, who it's just been marketed so much by HBO and Sky over here in the UK. and we're talking about it, and the reviews are coming out so good. It's like, this is why it's going to transcend video games, and it seemingly is doing it so well. And I'm just hyped for that. I'm along for that ride. I can't wait to hear people at work talking about this show, and me being that kind of savant who knows about it, because I'm like, yeah, I've been playing it for like 9 years.
Well, I'm looking forward to like when it kind of transcends into my office at work, because I'm usually the guy who doesn't watch a lot of TV. So like when they're talking about stuff, it's like, I haven't seen it. So I'm looking about like going, aha, I know not more than you.
You mean you're not?
This is the rarity.
You're telling me you're not watching Emily in Paris on Netflix?
No, I'm not watching Love Island either.
Me neither. Gem's in the chat with some Last of Us hype as well. But yes, then Richie, we fast forward from 1968, from that scary interview, to 2003. We're in Austin, Texas, and essentially we get the introduction of our two main characters, Joel and his daughter Sarah. In the house, apparently, pancakes, breakfast are involved, and I think this is just a really good scene. It basically sets up, it introduces us to Pedro Pascal, it introduces us to his daughter, played by Nico Parker, and which I only found out today as well, is the daughter of like Thandie Newton.
Yeah,
didn't know that until like today, and I was reading some stuff, and I was like, oh, okay, so she's got like acting heritage within her family. And before we even get into her role, though, she absolutely crushed it as Sarah.
100%, amazing.
Like we've got a part at the end of the show where we're going to do like best performance of the week, but I think it's going to be hard. It's going to be a hard one to pick, and we'd like the chat to definitely help us out with that. But yeah, Nico Parker as Sarah, like for as far as like channeling the video game character but putting her own spin on it, I think she did a terrific job. Absolutely outstanding. Like, she showed that, like, the warmth you'd expect from a daughter. She showed vulnerability at the right time. She showed intelligence, humor, just perfect relationship back and forth with Pedro Pascal's character in the most, like, humbling father-daughter kind of way.
Yeah, 100%. I'm kind of glad, because when we pick up with Sarah and Joel, is actually earlier in their time. Slightly, it's like, literally, it's like basically a day earlier than you start off in the game, because you start off basically in the game on the evening of the outbreak.
Yeah.
This, you kind of start off on the morning of the outbreak, so you get a full day with pretty much Sarah.
Yeah, and it's
and
great
just going about a day, and I think that was so important. After just playing the intro of The Last of Us, and yeah, you kind of just drop straight into the thick of it with that intro. While the intro is awesome for video game, that extra time with Sarah really makes it pop, to be honest.
It does. It's certainly needed. And I think Meg in the chat, seeing more of Sarah's view and Joel's like regular life really just kind of, I guess as an audience, it makes you relate to them more. You see them like messing up breakfast and joking about always being busy all the time and hearing stuff on the radio and just talking about, I think they talk about the geography of what's mentioned on the radio and they don't know what country it's in. And again, it's a way
get an idea of who these two characters are a bit more, like what's their life like day to day, with just dad and daughter together. Yeah. And Uncle Tommy.
Single parent as well, again, struggling, needs to go to work long hours. Like, we get a little bit of that in the game, but yeah. Like,
I have to work, although it's my birthday, I have to work double shift because we need the contractor to sort this out. If we don't get it done today, we don't get paid, that sort of stuff. And you get the context of, as a single parent, one income, looking after a daughter that he needs to probably get the money without actually saying, oh, they're struggling to get by financially. They kind of hint that they're struggling to get by a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of financially, shout out to Jem in the chat for that awesome £10 super chat. Jem, you are a legend. And yeah, it does really just help set up that dynamic, that relationship. And I'm glad they introduced Tommy here as well, because Tommy does play a big part of the story. And albeit we probably won't see him for maybe another episode or two after this initial introduction, it's that brotherly relationship with the daughter. They clearly work together. I love the fact they just have a bit of banter. They keep giving each other like shit backwards forwards. Like, he finds eggshells in the breakfast and she's like, oh, it's protein. And Tommy doesn't get pancakes, and it's like, oh, he hates sharing the job with him anyway. It is that family banter you come to expect.
It's Joel's like, oh, there's eggshells, it's like calcium. Then later on at the end of that scene, like, Joel's like, "Oh, come on, Ellie, come on, Sarah, we need to go." And she's like, "Let me finish my eggshells."
Yeah, it's funny, and then she pulls her
Yeah,
face.
little bits of humor. I didn't
Yeah.
actually pick up on that on my first watch. I did on my second watch. And I was like, "Oh yes."
Yeah, she pulls that smug face with egg coming out of
Yeah.
her teeth and everything. Like again,
okay.
I just got flashbacks. Like my sister would do something like that when we were kids. Like just show you all
Yeah.
the chewed up food in her mouth and because that's what that sibling brotherly family rivalry kind of deal, isn't it? And then as they leave and go off to work, we get introduced to the Adlers, which are the neighbours who aren't the neighbours from the game. So in the video game, it's just a neighbour called Jimmy who gets infected and breaks through the glass. This time, again, adding more context, we get to see just their neighbours. It's two older people looking after their even elder, probably mother of one of them in a wheelchair. Clearly has some problem, dementia or something. It doesn't have any motor functionality with her mouth. Can't even eat the scones that are being fed to her, or the biscuits, I should say. On a morning, and again, just a little bit of joking backwards and forwards, but these are going to play a key part in the scenes to come.
The first hint.
Yeah, the first hint of what it is, whether they're feeding her. We're lady in the wheelchair, not very well. So we kind of move things on a little bit. Sarah goes about a day. She goes to school. And again, just adding more context. I don't know if you picked up on it, but in the school...
the watch.
Yeah,
the bracelet of the kid.
The kid next to her twitching along.
With just a twitch. But it's not like he's fiddling because he's bored in class, which again, when you first look at the eyes, he's just bored in class and it's like the light's flashing across Sarah's face. Yeah. But no, it's an involuntary twitch.
Yeah, he's got a twitch. And then you hear someone coughing as well. And again, I don't know about you, but anyone coughing out in public now, you've got that stigmatism of oh shit, are they really, really ill? But she goes about her day, yeah, she goes and gets the watch fixed. And I think this is the point when we start to hear jets fly overhead.
Yeah.
And then as an audience member, that's when we start thinking, oh, that 1968 interview with the scientist. We know it's going to happen. It's coming at some point. We've seen it in the trailers for the show. The show wouldn't be a show without this. That happens. And then, the watch shop shuts up early. She says, go home to your family. Almost in a panic. And then as an audience, we start to think, oh, something's not right. Something's not right here.
They're doing a good job at this point in the show as well of setting up Sarah to look like she's going to be a main character.
Yeah, if you've not played the video game and you're just watching this, I can't wait to get the feedback from my parents who are watching this, having never played the game. When Sarah's demise inevitably happens, they're not going to be seeing that coming.
There's a point coming up actually in a bit where I did notice a slight change of perspective, where almost like the switch flipped from Sarah to Joel.
Yeah, you can almost see it. And again, I'm just people who read the Game of Thrones books and then went into watching the series were so shocked when certain characters died. Yeah, Pedro Pascal included. And obviously people just knew that was coming, and they were waiting for wait till next week, wait till the Red Wedding week, that kind of thing. And with this show, we knew this was going to happen, and I knew Nico Parker was not long for this world, but damn, she played such a good job at building that emotion and relationship that you really, really felt for it as it started. I felt worried for her as soon as things started to go a bit off in the world. I was like, oh dear, go home, dear, lock yourself in.
I know exactly. I'm saying that I know exactly how this is going to play out.
Mm-hmm.
But we're now in territory that I haven't seen before because we haven't explored this. The run up that her day is up to the point. Mm-hmm. So it's how is this going to go down?
Yeah, how is it going to come about?
In some ways, I think. I mean, there's a bit more mentioned a bit later on. It's it's almost suggesting Sarah might be infected.
Yeah, they get to that point because she goes into the city. And when she gets for the watch, I suppose, and when we get back from the city, she goes and hangs out with the neighbours again, making raisin cookies. What the hell? Kids want chocolate chip. I scrumpled mine up. Yeah,
I was raisins. And she's
it's every kid would be like, oh, fuck's sakes.
But that adds to the early conversation with us about Ellie for breakfast, as if they like them, but they don't want to hang out with them. It's
and obviously
we don't want to go for breakfast or anything.
And my take was because Joel's a single parent, she probably spends some time with the neighbours. They probably look after her for a few hours while he's coming home from work on an evening. But again, a nice relationship. She's in the house, and this is where we start to see the stuff taking hold. When she's getting the DVD off the shelf, Richie, and Lady in the Wheelchair is out of focus, so you can't quite see what she's doing. And her mouth is just unnaturally moving in these weird yawn motions. And we're just kind of like, again, you want to scream at the TV and go, look behind you. It's behind you. Almost like pantomime style.
Yeah.
And she just moves away, goes back into the next room. And we're thinking like, oh dear. She goes home. And on her way, on her way out, Mercy, poor dog, border collie there. Dog does not like lady in the wheelchair. Dog is sat kind of like struck with fear looking out this lady. And of course, this happens in movies all the time, in TV shows and horror movies. Animals always know when shit's wrong before humans do. It's either birds flee the area or the dogs are barking at Terminators, but the animals always know what's up before.
It's a bit tropey, but it's a nice little way of pointing towards something.
I mean, it's weird because I was talking with the wife about saying, like, out of context though, you wouldn't really question it. Like my family's dog often randomly just stares at you, and you look at her and go, "Why is she looking at me like that?"
What do you want?
Yeah, what do you want? Do you need to go out? Do you need to wait? Like, you don't really think of it out of the context. But in this scenario,
it's just attention usually.
Yeah, but being the audience, knowing what we know, and again hearing more jets go over the top, more helicopters, we start to almost like build panic in our own minds about what's going on. So we get to this point. She goes home, gets to nighttime, falls asleep. She doesn't fall asleep, sorry. Joel comes home, he thanks her for locking the door, and we get a really good insight into like the video game and their relationship here, where she gives him the watch for his birthday. She says she sells hardcore drugs, which still made me laugh, which does in the video game every time. Start helping out with the mortgage then, which he didn't use that line, I don't think, in the TV show.
No, I don't think so. But
just
it's definitely there in the game.
Yeah.
So, like, you can start helping out with the mortgage there. But there again, we've already had a bit more banter between Sarah and Joel, so they might have just, it's not needed.
Yeah, you don't need to use it line for line. I totally get that. The movie they're watching, by the way, Curtis and the Viper 2, is from the video game. It's one of Joel's favourite movies, and in The Last of Us Part 2, there's 4 of them. And it's about a group of people, and one of them becomes a ninja, and they basically go fight like Soviet Russians and whatnot. It's his
action flick.
It is action flick, yeah, absolutely terrible. But it's a cult classic clearly for people like Joe. And I think you can find like the movie posters throughout the world of both video games. Like the Wolf movie that's on, I think he went to see with Sarah at one point. Dawn of the Wolf or something, I think it's called. But either way, they watch that, she falls asleep. And interesting enough, change the video game. This is where Tommy rings up and says he's in prison. There was a bar fight. Some guy attacked a waitress. Tommy knocked him out and he got himself put in prison. And he's bailing out for the weekend. And that's the great reasons why we get Joel out of the house. Because in the video game, he's just not home from work. We don't know where he's at. But this gives him context for actually leaving and putting Tommy kind of in the picture a little bit more. So I appreciated that change.
I did. I think it's in the game, it's a bit jarring because like Joel takes Sarah to bed.
Mm-hmm.
She wakes up in the middle of the night and he's just not around till he comes back.
Yeah.
It's just a bit, well, right, you're watching a film, then at 2 o'clock in the morning, suddenly you turn up back home. It's like, what's happened?
Yeah, what's up there? And
so it gives a bit more explanation. Yeah. And also, again, Tommy getting in a bar fight with someone being aggressive, it's another finger pointing at things going wrong.
Yeah, we know it's not someone getting aggressive. It's probably an infected person. So again, adding all these things up. Sarah then wakes up. There's kind of like big explosions outside. You hear helicopters overhead again. One of the only odd things they added kind of into this moment that was a bit odd for me, that made me think twice, was, did you notice all the explosions were kind of like bright neon green? Throughout the episode. It happens a little bit later on as well, and I don't understand why they would be green. Like, unless it's like a special type of napalm, maybe, or...
It could be like a gas explosion. Some gases burn different colours.
Yeah, it happened a few times when, like, it might just be flares. Like, the military might be using flares, but it did seem very odd, this big, vibrant flash of green coming over the sky. Almost like Meg said in the chat, like an alien invasion. But... because that's, like, green's not really anywhere in the game. They use red a lot in the sequel, in the second game, for, like, atmospheric effect. But, yeah, green, interesting choice, because it stood out in my mind. But either way, Sarah finds out that, the TV's not working. All the channels she skips through them are all, like, kind of on the default emergency response thing. The military will be in touch kind of thing. And then the dog scares the shit out of us all by tapping on the window. Don't know about you, but I jumped at that part. Didn't expect little border collie Mercy to be at the window. Let me in! Let me in! Wants to be saved. And then, she tries to drag the dog back over to the neighbours, and that dog was having none of it. It was like, nope. Yep. Did not want to go back in there, slip the collar, and just be free. Be free. And yeah, I was glad to see the dog safely got away. I don't need to see the dog getting ripped up by runners this early in the show.
We can just assume it survives.
Until we get our 20-year flash forward and inevitably R.I.P. Mercy. But yes, hopefully lived out its best life in the wilderness. Sarah then, of course, makes her way into the Adler's house. And this is when it starts to really kind of crank up the obvious zombie flick horror. You see the streak of blood on the floor, Resident Evil style. You look up, Mr. Adler sat there with his neck practically ripped out, not looking too good. And I think he says, "Help me." I didn't watch this with subtitles on.
I didn't catch what he said.
He says, "Help me," I think, and then he kind of motions with his eyes over to the side, which I don't know how Sarah's not seen the other person just to the right of her at this point, but behind the kitchen counter is the other Mrs. Adler, with presumably Mrs. Adler Sr., her mother, or his mother, feasting on her neck, but not in a typical zombie way of like ripping the blood out. It was a fungal thing, like tendrils coming out of her mouth, which were almost like attaching itself to a new host, which I thought visually was fantastic.
That's what it's meant to be, because they're not feeding on the victim, it's passing on its genetic code, it's implanting itself, and that's how it spreads, because it's just trying to spread. Yeah, it's not trying to consume.
Which I totally thought was just perfect for the TV. They have clarified that there are not going to be spores in this TV show. So traditionally you would get infected by inhaling the spores. And for whatever reason, Neil and Craig came out and said that it just wasn't going to work visually for the TV show. And that's why we have these things called tendrils, which is that kind of like creepy plant fungus thing.
Which was part of the initial concept art anyway.
It was, yeah, which is great. There's these little kind of creepy creatures, which I'm glad they didn't use in the video game.
It is horrible when like the old lady looks up and the tendrils are kind of sticking to the heart.
Yeah, Jem in the chat says it wasn't just she wasn't just eating spaghetti, and you kind of have that picture of you bring your head up from a bowl of spaghetti, and it's all hanging out. And then basically, just shit pops off. She runs through. Oh, little side note: who has saloon doors in their kitchen? Just as I noted it, like the Adlers have these weird wooden bar saloon doors from a Western movie in their kitchen. Never seen that.
The house, I think, is meant to look a bit dated. They're a bit of an older family. I mean, this is early 2000s, so it's like, you know, if you've ever been to a relative's house who haven't decorated in like 20 years, I think that's the kind of vibe they're going with a bit.
But saloon doors, I guess in the UK, the similarity thing would be like beads. Like when I used to go on jobs with my dad as a kid, like loads of old ladies used to have like those wooden beads hanging down from the kitchen door. But it just did make me pause for a second and be like, who the hell has saloon doors? Even in 2003. But we digress. It might have just been a trend in like Texas at the time. I guess Texas, yeah. Either way, she runs out of there. Sarah's out there. She's scared deathless, runs out. And we finally see this old lady who's basically, remember, been immobilized by whatever disability she was suffering from. She's now a sprightly young Olympic sprinter bursting out of the house. And what I really appreciate is the movement they gave to them. It had like a really weird, like, I'm trying to think, it's almost as though the clip of the woman was sped up. It's
kind of primal. It's just like all powered by
rage,
sheer aggression and rage and just...
But if you know what I mean, when she straightened up her neck, it was almost as though it was a few frames faster than a human would be able to move, if that makes sense. And I think we see it later on in a few moments. But yeah, she runs out of the house. Joel and Tommy rock up in the truck, and Joel has his good old trusty wrench. Tommy has his rifle. And this is the moment where he just like socks this lady across the face. He's like, sit down, Mrs. Adler. Whack. She's down for the count. Sarah's obviously incredibly taken aback by this. She goes straight into that emotional, like, you killed her. Like, she just watched her dad straight up murder someone. Because she doesn't understand, like, what the hell's going on. She's just a kid. But that's when you really realise, like, shit's real.
It's a very important Joel moment, that, to be honest, because it shows while he's still shouting across to the kid over the road, get back inside. So it's like, yeah, there's a good guy here, but then his ability to just snap when it comes to protecting his family and just be this ultra violent person is so important to Joel as a character.
Yeah, and we're going to see loads of that like later on, even in this episode. But I would have done the same thing if it was anyone I loved behind me. I would not probably think it a second. I just clock him over the head.
It's just how easy he does it. Doesn't think for a second, just does it. and then he's okay with Sarah's not okay with it, but Joel is.
Yeah, he's straight in a
But
survival
there again,
mode.
there's hints throughout the points where it's just like maybe he's been in the army, he's served in conflicts before, so he's probably had either him or Tommy have served in the army, so there's been some sort of training there.
Yeah, I think Tommy
So
certainly
know-
does. I think his jacket in the game has some kind of patch on it. That's like some rifle association or some group. So maybe that'll play out more in the show for all we know. But yeah, they get in the car, and this is where, again, as a big fan of the video games, this was almost just scene for scene. When they pull up to like the street signs at the first junction in the back of the truck, it is just like, this is the exact same. You could put a side-by-side comparison. It just looks like the game.
I can't wait
Headlights,
till
full
someone
beam,
does it.
and you see it down the track. Go past, of course, the farm, which this is where they relate to. It's Jimmy's farm. Now, Jimmy, again, in the game, is the guy who breaks through the patio doors, and that's who Joel kills in front of Sarah instead of the Adlers. But yeah, look at Jimmy's farm up in flame. And I was like, at least Jimmy managed to upgrade from a little house condo to a full-on farm complex, but he still died nonetheless, it would appear. We get the same scene where they ignore the people who pass by on the street, and Sarah has that great line of like, we should have helped them, and Tom is like, they've got a kid, Joel, and he's like, so do we, like, just drive on again. Joel being ruthless, protecting Sarah.
Almost word for word.
Yeah, you're really, really good. And again, at this point in the car, you, as a gamer, you can move around. Like, you can see what's going on in the background. You can see police sirens, and it's a bit more focused, but it's all done in one take. Just one shot from the second they leave the home in the car, the truck, all the way to what happens in the end. Because this was kind of one of the big first differences to the car chase, Richie, is you think they're going to get hit by a car from the side if you played the games, and that's what flips them over. No. I don't know if you've seen it, but you know that long shot of the street out the rear view window?
Yeah.
Did you spot the plane on the in the first instance? Because it kind of pans back to the front of the car and then it goes back again.
I did, and to be honest, I forgot that it was a car getting sideswiping them in the game because it's been that long since I played it. So it was only actually after I watched it and then I started the game again and was like, that is different.
Yeah. And again,
that's actually one of the reasons why I wanted to start the game. I'm looking for differences.
And
I need to refresh it.
I definitely think it was a great one because we've had planes and helicopters and jets flying over all day long. So to see one be downed in the sky was fantastic. And I think it was like the plane wheel that smashes through the window. And then again, we cut to black.
Yeah.
We wake up. Sarah's hurt her ankle. Tommy's outside the car already. Joel gets her out. They're separated. A police vehicle crashes into the back of them, which then separates Tommy from them two in an alleyway. And then this is again the part in the video game where petrol stations blew up, the theaters blew up. You've got Sarah in your arms, and you are controlling Joel through the streets in like a panic to get away.
Yeah, in the game, you actually Tommy's still with you at this point. It's when you go into the diner that he holds the door while you get away.
Yeah. So again, nice, clever. Again, just a different take on how to separate the two of them because we need it for this next point where he bumps into those runners. There was like 5 of them all feasting on people in like a diner. Again, the little tendrils out there. And this was the part for me which really, really cemented how I love the approach they've taken to the runners, where they're clearly not in control of their own bodies. But like you said, they're running with such intensity. They don't really know how to control their body. So this guy is just straight on, right through a door, into the far wall, right over the top of the countertops, into some glass, smashing through a doorway. There's no like actual control over what he's trying to do. He's just trying to catch them.
It's not a human brain functioning. It's a fungus that like it's seen a thing. It's going to consume it. It's going after it, and it's running in straight lines.
Yeah. It's like,
it's not seeing an object in its way.
Yeah, because it
doesn't understand momentum.
Yeah. Momentum, obstacles, height, depth perception. It's just, there's Joel and Sarah. I'm going to eat them now and run as fast as I possibly can to get to them. And we see it again, smash through there. Just as he's about to get them, bang, gunshot. Military steps in. And again, this is almost where we like blend back into the video game world where he's there. He has the radio. Joel explains to him that they're not sick. She's just hurt her ankle. We're just trying to get away. And then you hear the radio come over and he's like, yes, sir. Yes, sir. And even without the context, I think the video game actually does that radio conversation a little bit better because I think the military guy actually says, but sir, it's a little girl. And then he goes, yes, sir. And he actually you can almost like see what the other half of the conversation is doing. This one on the TV show, the guy just says, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir, a few times. And then, obviously, the inevitable happens. Yeah. He pulls his gun on them. Joel turns his back, gunshots roll down the hill. Joel's injured, comes on up and spotlight, flashlight right in his face. Just as you think he's about to kill him, bang. In comes Uncle Tommy, MVP, with his rifle, pops the guy in the head, and then they both have that sober moment of realization that, oh shit, Sarah's with us as well. And then, Richie, we just get into the same scene, essentially. The same emotional scene that we got in the video game. I did well up, again, as in this, as much as I usually do when I play the video game. I think even as someone, like, I don't have a daughter yet, but even someone who doesn't have kids, I just think it's
got empathy, though.
Yeah, I am still a human, but I just think it builds, again, Nico Parker's performance and Pedro Pascal's up at this point. I just think it hit on all the same beats as the game does. Like, it delivers on such a good emotional, like, standards. It's meaningful.
It's Tommy just looking like just white and pale and just absolutely frozen because he knows what's happening. Like, he's just like, Joel. Like, Joel's like panicking, like, Tommy, help me. And he's just like,
I can't. It's too
There's
late.
nothing I can do.
Yeah. He cradles her in his arms. Again, something about just the way they say, like, oh, don't baby, keep me with baby. It's like, oh shit. Nice little tidbit there. The military guy who shoots them, that is the director, Craig Mazin. That is a cameo from the director. So if you want to hate someone, the director's the one who shot Sarah. But yeah, emotional. We cut to black once again, and then that kind of, you just have to sit with that. And again, I'm sure it hits differently for different people. If you're a parent out there with a daughter of again a similar age, I'd imagine that must hit like so differently for other people. But yeah, fantastic again. And that is the end of Nico Parker. Whether we'll see maybe more flashbacks with them later on in the series, according to IMDb, she's in 2 episodes, so we might get a bit of a flashback later on to maybe show some more father-daughter relationships. And again, a TV series can do that a bit more. We've actually seen it in the games in part 2. They do a couple of flashbacks with Joel and Ellie to when they were younger, to kind of add a bit of a kind of added emotion to it. So interesting.
To fill in the gaps of the bits that you don't see.
Absolutely. We flash forward 20 years. The game again takes place slightly different. So the video game was 2013, 20 years forward. The TV show takes place 2003 when the outbreak day, and then we flash forward to 2023. So that brings us up to today. And when you see that 2023 and it goes Boston, and you basically see like Boston is just destroyed, destruction everywhere except for the Boston quarantine zone, this little fortress walled off area, and we see a little kid walking through the forest with some bright trainers, Richie, and this kid is not well.
No, not well at all. And you're just like, well, he's just clearly wandering out. You don't know what's going on. He's probably starving. Like, he's got some funky trainers. Something's about to happen.
Something is about to happen. He gets in there. They pick him up. They let him through. They put him in a wheelchair. And there's a lady, Fedra agent. So we're no longer now just the military. It is Fedra, which are the kind of the control for. I always forget what Fedra actually means. It's like it's basically the group of people who are going to look after.
Martial law's being declared, basically.
Yeah, completely. Everyone's on ration cards. We find out about that. And the kid, the lady takes him in the wheelchair. They do a quick scan check, which is quite important. She has a nice little conversation with him, basically saying, where did you get the scratch? We're going to get you some of your favourite food and some toys. You'll feel a little pinch in your neck. The guy behind us shows her the little red showing up on the scanner, and we don't know if red's good or bad.
It's such a subtle, you kind of know. Red's very rarely a good colour.
That's true.
It's the way he, like the guy in the background, he just kind of scans it and just subtly shows her. And then walks off and is like...
Just like that. And then he comes back and says, you're going to feel another little pinch. And it's like, they're straight up just euthanizing this kid. Right here, right now. That injection goes in. You won't feel anything. And then we cut to bodies getting flung on a burning heap pile. And we see Joel again. Obviously, a lot of grey in his hair. Looking a bit worse for wear. Basically dumping bodies out of a truck onto this pile, and this is where we see a woman who we don't really get a name, but she's like, I can't do it. And we see Joel basically pick up the body of this kid, probably a few years younger than Sarah, but still a kid nonetheless, dumps it in the fire, done. And that apparently is where the episode was going to end originally.
Yeah. Going back to that Fedra woman, it's just how kind of cold she is about the whole thing. She's saying kind things, but she has no emotion about the situation at all. she's basically quite happy to just lie to this child who gets euthanized, knowing full well some guy's just going to chuck it on a bonfire.
Yeah.
Like, it's I from a purely pragmatic point of view, you're like, kids infected. Infection is very dangerous. You either send them back out in the wild, or you probably do. It is probably the kind thing to do.
Yeah.
But it's the way you kind of do it. It's like feels quite cold, quite calculated, quite malicious.
Yeah. And it immediately kind of sets the tone for how far the world has came in 20 years
what Fedra are about as an organization.
Yeah, like this is the standard we're at now, where if you are scratched and you show red, like you're straight up getting put down. Just like that. And we see some signs and stuff on the wall that talk about the disease takes effect. It was like bite on the neck, bite on the leg. It took like different time frames, which does make me think in the show you see a lot of people as it pans through the streets in the next shot, you see a lot of people with kind of limbs missing. And I'm wondering if maybe in this world of the TV show, if you are bitten, you do have time to kind of lop off the limb and cauterize the wound, similar to what they do in The Walking Dead and other zombie things. Like if you get bit, if you react quick enough, you could act, like if you're on your neck, you're screwed. But if it's your hand, chop your arm off. If it's your foot, chop your leg off. That kind of thing.
Yeah, if you get bit in the hand and you cut off at the elbow for like an hour or something, the spores haven't had a chance to infect your entire body, so you're going to be fine.
Yeah.
So I picked up on that as well. I'm guessing that's going to be explored maybe a bit later.
Yeah. Well, the amputees are alive, so it's safe to say like it might work. The only thing,
although they could just be amputees to show how cruel the world is, as kind of.
Well, that could be martial law.
How rough. Yeah.
That could be like you've stole something, you lose your hand.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like kind of thing, which is crazy, but again, setting the tone. In the video games, the only thing we really see is in the Left Behind DLC, there's a military group of soldiers, and there's reading the audio logs and the diary entries. One of them is bit, and they do cut his arm off, or his leg off, I think it is. But he ends up bleeding out in a air vent. So you do find him with his final memo, and he's like, fuck, I ended up bleeding out anyway. So you don't actually know if he turned, or he just bled out, but there's nothing actually in the game that really references it other than that.
I always took that moment as this kind of Neil Druckmann intentionally, like maybe addressing it, but wanting to leave it ambiguous so you can make a decision on it in the future if it becomes a useful plot device. Yeah. So let's address it. They try to do it, but it failed because they bled out, and this is why you can't just start cutting off limbs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you might just die anyway.
You might just die. We see a bit more of the world after the fire. We see rations explained. We see Joel asking for more work. Clearly, he's trying to save up tons of rations for something. We see Firefly propaganda for the first time, so that's the kind of rebellion group that are out there with the Firefly spray paint. If you're lost in the darkness, look for the light is their kind of slogan. We see Joel swap some rations for cigarettes and drugs. So he gives cigarettes and drugs to a Fedra agent, so there's obviously some corruption going on. Yeah, there's some corruption going on. There's a public hanging taking place for people who've left the quarantine zone. So again, back to the amputees, it seems like there's quite strict martial law of if you are caught leaving the quarantine zone, you get hung.
Yeah.
Which is
because you're...
Okay.
It's... It's very, very cold, very harsh. Mm-hmm. But what they'll be looking at, the point of view of like Fedra, will be like, if you leave the quarantine zone, it's safe in here. If you get infected, you come back in, that could be this entire quarantine zone done.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see a bit of that later on. It turns out Joel is looking to leave the city in search of Tommy already, which again is different from the video games. Tommy's already long gone in the games, and Joel's relationship, he hasn't spoke to him for many, many years. At this point, it seems like Tommy's been missing for 3 weeks, and Joel's just on a crusade to go find his brother, essentially.
Yeah. So they're changing Tommy and Joel's relationship quite a lot, because, at least at this point in the story, because in the game, it's kind of like Joel almost reluctantly goes looking for Tommy in the game. It's like they're not on good terms. And I mean, I know we said no spoilers, but I think we'll avoid talking about why till probably later episodes.
I can see from a television standpoint, if in a video game where it might not crop up until many, many hours later, in a TV series you can't really sideline your side characters for 3, 4, 5 episodes and then hope by episode 7 of the show people go, it's that guy again. I think you need, again, from a television standpoint, you need to tell the story a little bit differently, and maybe seeing more of Tommy's perspective is going to do that. And the next part we kind of see is the introduction of Tess, and she's in a meeting with Robert. They're having a fight over a battery. We don't really know who Tess is yet. Within the TV show, she talks about just she got jumped by two of Robert's teenage kind of followers. Some deal argument over a battery, which we presume is what Joel needs to get out to see Tommy from his conversation. So we know Tess and Joel are immediately kind of in the same conversation circles. There's a big Firefly attack. Tess gets arrested. So we then know that the Fireflies are active in the quarantine zone. They're attacking Fedra agents.
I mean, straight up, Tess is actually not doing anything wrong at this moment. She hands herself over because there's Fedra agents one side, Fireflies the other side, shooting at each other.
Mm-hmm.
She makes a split decision. Just rest me.
It's literally wrong place, wrong time. Absolutely. Yeah. And from there, we see Tess. She gets back to Joel eventually, but in the meantime, we see Ellie is introduced. So we kind of get a big character dump here in the quarantine zone, which again we fast forwarded, so we're going to get this. Ellie's introduced, but she introduces herself as Veronica, which I thought was an odd start. And she seems to be under some kind of house arrest by the Fireflies, and they're making her run loads of kind of mental tests based on motor functions and count to 10.
1, 2,
She's
3,
chained
4,
up.
5, 6, 7, 8. Fuck you.
Yeah, which immediately sets the tone for Ellie's kind of character there as well.
Yeah.
Again, introduction to Bella Ramsey does a terrific job this episode of showing kind of Ellie's kind of energy levels and kind of her attitude towards authority, essentially.
Yeah. Her personality, Ellie's she's channeled Ellie's personality very well.
Very, very well. And is a point.
My name's Veronica, same as yesterday.
Yeah, and
the whole sticking out her arm before she gets asked to
so it clearly shows she's not crazy. She knows basic tests. Again, interesting introduction to Ellie. Bella Ramsey as well has said before that she's never played the video game. She was told actively not to by Neil and Craig. So I know a lot of people are going oh, she absolutely nailed certain ways she talks and stuff. And it's no, that's just Bella Ramsey with direction from the director and the executive producer.
Yeah.
And this is what I want, is I don't want her to be a carbon copy of the video game character. I want all of these actors to put their own stamp on it.
Yeah.
Enough for me to enjoy new things. I don't want it to be the same script word for word.
When you have this level of talent in your cast, you don't want them to do a carbon copy of someone else's performance. You want them to find the character themselves.
Yeah.
It's still Ellie, it's still Joel, even if they are slightly different.
Absolutely. From there, we then cut back to Joel, and he's in the radio tower. He swaps the cigarettes for basically a really shit message that says, there is no message. Tommy's been off the grid for 3 weeks now. He asked for the directions to a different radio tower, and then he basically goes back to his flat, digs up a floorboard, gets out a hatchet, I think he does, and his good old trusty wrench, a map, and some whiskey. And he basically gets shit-faced and high, Richie, while plotting the route to where Tommy is beyond out there in Wyoming somewhere.
Yeah, Megan Chattis just said she found Bella Ramsey's Ellie to be angrier. In the game, than in the game. I think you are right for The Last of Us 1. Part 2, Ellie is a bit of a different beast. There's a lot more aggression in there. Yeah,
and I think for Ellie's character, we see later in the episode, we're going to see a bit more in depth about her backstory and where she's been and her kind of upbringing within the quarantine zone. So I think the reason she comes across maybe as a bit more hardened and aggressive is going to be made clearer. I think next week we're probably going to see some flashbacks maybe. To do with her time because in the quarantine zone, we'll get to it, but they basically say she's in military preparatory school, which she is in the game as well, and we know she meets her friend Riley is in there as well, and Marlene, on the request of her mother, put her in the military school so she was kept safe. So there's reasons for her upbringing where she is, and we'll get to that in a little bit of time. But back to Joel. Joel's getting high and drunk. And when I said right at the beginning of the show, Rich, about the music, I don't know if you realise, but while he's getting drunk and he's plotting out his map thing, the music is very much the tone that plays when you come across hunters in the video game around the Pittsburgh area. So they're really dull bass tones. There's almost I'm not going to try and make the noise, but if you go back and watch it, it's definitively, if anyone played the multiplayer factions, it's that ominous music that plays when something bad is about to happen. When you come up on a group of people talking and it switches from normal music to this sound, it's like, oh, this is the bad guy theme. And they kept that in there as well. Tess shows up, she gets into bed with him, so clearly they're more of a thing. In the video games, it was always suggested they were in a relationship, but never directly really showed any kind of...
You couldn't tell whether they were just kind of smuggling partners or that actually there's something a bit romantic going on.
Yeah, the only thing we really get in the game is Tess near the end when she's like... Again, I won't go into spoilers for that one, but she's like, oh, there's got to be something here between us that makes you see through this journey. And that's really all I get, where she straight up just gets into bed with him here. And on the morning, obviously when they're having breakfast, he realises that her face isn't looking too good. And immediately I love how Tess goes back on her word, and she was like, I told Robert I wasn't going to get him. And she's like, let's go fuck Robert up.
That is actually kind of taken from the games, that actually. Yeah. Like, just like during the conversation with Robert earlier, she's like, Robert's like, what more concerned about Tessa's guy? What about your guy? And Tessa's like, he's under control. He listens to me. He won't do a thing unless I tell him to.
Yeah, he's the muscle
kind of thing. And then you kind of find out that is Joel. And it's like, again, it's another character moment for Joel without actually seeing Joel do something. It's like, this guy is terrified of Joel.
Yeah, absolutely. When she's like, just calm down, take a breath, because I know what you'll do.
Yeah.
Like she kind of does control his actions and his movements.
Yeah.
Which
take a breath. Great. Now let's go do it.
Yeah, let's get a plan to go fuck up Robert. So they head out to that one.
Yeah.
Of course, Robert's kind of he's not a boss fight, but he's in the video game. He's very much, I would say, the end of the tutorial section of the game. They show you how to craft, how to crouch, and he's kind of the first big stopping point in the game.
I'd say he's the first boss fight.
Yeah, I would say so. Well, it's not really a boss fight, but you know what I mean? It's the first kind of chapter in the video game. We then go back over to the Fireflies. We see Marlene for the first time. We've heard, obviously, a lot about the Fireflies, and now Marlene is the one character who is reprising her role, Mel Dandridge, from the video game to the TV series. So it's the same lady who plays her in the game and the TV show, which is awesome, because guess what? It looks and sounds like Marlene. And when you say about, yes, you could go out and cast everyone, but the reality is, Ashley Johnson, who voices Ellie, does not look like Ellie. Troy Baker looks nothing like Joel Miller. So you have to take some things where it's perfect that the body capture they use for this is just Marlene through and through.
Yeah, 100%. They probably designed the character of Marlene in the games off her. They probably cast her and then figured out what the character looks like. Well, for motion cap and stuff, make it look. That's why I think nowadays you do get the characters looking a bit more like the actor who played, because it's probably just easier for motion cap.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's came along with time and motion captures. It's evolved and got better and got better. But yeah, I like the introduction of Marlene. She's kind of got a crew. She gives some of her kind of colleagues a little bit of shit about, like, do what you're told to. That's your job. Stop basically talking back to me. I'm the leader. So it kind of establishes her as the kind of lead. And she says about, if you're a rebellion after 20 years, you just end up being spray paint on a wall. So it just shows that they've been trying to break this quarantine zone of this federal control for nearly 20 years now, and they still aren't really getting anywhere. But Ellie seems to be the key and the purpose as to why they're like, we're moving out.
Yeah.
Like, let's get out of Boston. We're going west. And she hands over a little piece of paper to Kim, who looks like she's a Firefly number 2. And we never get to see what's on it. Any speculation, Richie, to what was on there?
I think it's probably information about Ellie.
Mm-hmm.
Because what follows up immediately is this real? And Marlene's like, I believe it is.
Yeah.
So I think it's clearly, and they were just talking. And Marlene just kicked every other Firefly out the room before that conversation about Ellie as well. So it's like, this is need to know information only.
Yeah. We later on then see Marlene actually talk to Ellie about putting her in school. Ellie calls her a terrorist because she's a Firefly member, which again is the propaganda that kind of Fedra try and get out there, that the Fireflies are the bad guys.
It's not incorrect.
No, absolutely not. If you're from the perspective of the government trying to control a quarantine zone, you've got these people blowing shit up and shooting people on the streets, then yes, I can completely see that.
Fedra are not good at all, but the Fireflies technically would be a terrorist organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And we kind of get a bit more context for here. So Marlene explains to Ellie that she put her in the preparatory school because it would be the safest place for her, I guess, in a military compound. Yeah, no surprise. And she said that she promised her mother, Anna, that she would look after her, which again is Ellie's mom.
train her to survive.
Yeah, that too gives you those basic things, and that's where she met Riley, and she references Riley. And again, spoilers for anyone who's not played the Left Behind DLC, but Riley is Ellie's best friend from the school who ends up joining and becoming a Firefly with Marlene. But she doesn't want Ellie to join the Fireflies because she's trying to protect her. And we're definitely going to see some kind of flashbacks because it has been confirmed. It's in the trailers. But Ashley Johnson, who voiced Ellie in the game, is playing Anna, Ellie's mother, in the TV show. So at some point, we're going to see Ashley Johnson on the screen, just like we'll also see Troy Baker reprise his role as well. Not reprise his role, sorry.
No,
play a different role. Yeah,
that'd be kind of weird.
Yeah, Pedro Pascal is Joel. Sorry, getting my characters crossed there. But then we cut back to Joel and Tess. They're on the hunt out for Robert. They take a pathway through the sewers, and this is another jump scare. Tess absolutely shits herself when she finds infected attached to the wall, fungus style. And this was kind of the first big horror jump we've got in the modern era, where even though they're in the quarantine zone and they're supposedly safe, there's a guy who's pretty much turned into a giant mushroom stuck to the wall. And this is kind of one of the moments in the game when you come across one of those, and that's when they explain how spores work. They've been infected for some time, and they kind of go through the stages of infection. And it looks like, if you're a runner, which is the early stages of infected, and if you don't kind of get sustenance, I guess, you decay and you turn into just a parasite, which it looks like. You've got to imagine that they've had to be puppeteered.
They're trying to get to the light.
Yeah,
a bit.
Look for the light.
So if you're in the bit, if you become infected underground, you can't get to the light. Eventually, the fungus will just consume the horse and no longer be able to move. And in this case, stuck it to a wall. Yeah,
and then starts to spread up the wall and such. And we're going to see, no doubt, more of that as the show goes on. So Tess jumps out of her skin. They have a little conversation around, was he infected when he came down here, or did he get infected down here? Which is what Joel retorts to her. So we have that interesting dynamic of even the quarantine zone is not safe. They come up through the sewers and they find out, they come across a hallway. Robert's already dead. The battery's a waste of time, which was interesting that they opted for kind of Robert to be dead. Again, he's not a big character in the game, but you do have quite a bit of dialogue back and forth with him. And Tess breaks his leg with a pipe, and Joel breaks his arm and shoot him in the head. And then Marlene shows up and says, I kind of needed him.
Yeah, I think they've made a decision here where that fight, that entire battle with Robert and his crew, is that necessary for the TV show? Mm-hmm. And if it's not, which I don't think it is, it's necessary for the game because it's a tutorial section. It teaches you about combat, it teaches about things around there. Mm-hmm. But I think it is one of them things you can actually cut out quite well in a TV show for the sake of time. It's would this just pad it for no real benefit and turn this into too much of an action flick?
Yeah. I completely agree. Initially, I was like, "Oh, Robert's already dead," but then I can completely understand why. Yeah, trim the fat a little bit. And you don't
want to make Joel a superhuman.
Yeah.
You want to keep it grounded, a bit more grounded.
Yeah, he is not a video game character in this world. He is a normal guy who just happens to be quite good at what he does. So Robert's dead. There's bodies all over the hallway. We finally get the connection where Joel and Tess finally meet up with Marlene and Kim. Something's clearly not right. There's blood everywhere, bodies everywhere. Ellie jumps out with a knife to try and get Joel. Joel absolutely WWE wall slams her, Richie, against the corridor, which I thought was just brutal. He just literally straight up grabs her, disarms her, whack straight against the wall. What an introduction of these two characters who are going to have to get along over the coming weeks. Marlene then explains the smuggler job. Joel has a really good back and forth with Ellie where she really wants that knife back, right? I know it's
Joel actually recognizes Marlene. That is that. I think that's important because that kind of links Joel to the Fireflies a bit.
Yeah.
Well, which is what I was mentioning earlier, maybe a bit about stuff with Tommy's well, I know they all live in the quarantine, but recognizing Marlene in that kind of way, it's Joel knows who she is.
Yeah, he's not phased. He kind of acknowledges that they're there for a reason. But yeah, so we see that moment where Ellie wants the knife back, puts the gun to her. She shows that oh shit, this is real. I've got a gun in my face. Maybe I shouldn't be so aggressive. But then she calls him an asshole when she finally when he slides a knife away. And there's obviously some emotional link to that. And I'm guessing it's going to relate back to maybe it was a gift left by her mother, which we don't really know anything about in the game. But she seems so passionate about it. I feel like everything that's going to link back in with the flashbacks to her mother potentially are here we are. It's something personal to Ellie, why she keeps such a passionate link to it. Marlene then explains the smuggler job, and I put it in our notes, but I had to laugh at the moment when a right-hand Lieutenant Kim is saying, like, I could do it. You don't give it to these smugglers. I can do it. And Marlene just snaps her and says, Kim, you don't have a fucking ear on your fucking head. And she's like, oh, and then you realise, you're like, oh shit, she doesn't. She's missing like half.
You'd seen her like holding something, like, but yeah, she's just like, ear's been blasted off.
Yeah, and I just thought that was like a nice little like lift in comedy, because it's been quite serious and dark in the corridor up until that point. They kind of escort Ellie off. She immediately cracks that musical chord in the bedroom with the music. It's like 60s, 70s, 80s music, means different things. Thought that was really a nice subtle scene of showing that she's intelligent. Like, not only is she immune, but she's also and like really relevant to the story, but she's clearly a smart girl as well. Like, she figured that out within 5 seconds of reading the book. And then she plays a trick on Joel in a moment to crack it even further. Joel goes to sleep. They talk about heading out. They leave the quarantine zone through the tunnels. And who did they bump into, Richie? The same damn Frederick agent that Joel was swapping drugs and cigarettes with earlier on, who did, bear in mind, did warn Joel, said, stay off the streets for a few days. People are tired. They've got itchy trigger fingers. The Firefly attacks are causing a few problems. And what night did they choose to sneak out on? This very night. And the guy's like, look, he's clearly got a deal with Joel, but he needs to do his job at some point. And when he's caught 3 of them sneaking out, he starts to do it. This is the one time he decides to do his job.
We'll play this by the book. That's what he says. I think there's a point where I think either Joel or Tess refers to Ellie as cargo.
Yeah, like, there is, which I think we'll probably see a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, with the Fedra agent guy, I think having him Joel do the drug deal with him earlier and establish him as a bit more of a character, because in the game, Fedra's just faceless goons, basically.
Yeah.
It shows, like, it adds a little bit of emotional weight to what's about to happen.
Yeah, I think Meg points out in the chat as well. Yeah, he'll break the rules to get the drugs, but he's not going to break the rules to let them escape. So it's kind of like there is a line somewhere.
He has his own line.
Yeah.
And to be fair, it's kind of hinted that the reason he takes drugs is because of some of the horrible shit he's had to do. Yeah. So he's dead drugs to kind of like same as Joel. Like, Joel gets blackout drunk every night.
Yeah, Joel does mention it, doesn't he, earlier on when he swaps the drugs? He says, like, oh, you need it for that. And I think he retorts back to him and just says, I could just shoot you. And he's like, but then what would you do?
Bullets and pills and bullets. Like,
absolutely.
That there's when they're talking about whether it's real, it's like, oh, was it made out wherever? I can't remember where it was. Mm-hmm. It's like, they only do 2 things, bullets and like drugs.
Yeah, it's what they make.
Because that's what they need.
So Federer guy goes through them one by one, scans Tess, scans Joel, scans Ellie, and obviously Ellie, knowing that she is infected, shits herself, gets a knife out, stabs him in the leg, doesn't want to get caught, like any kid would be in like a panic moment, just freaks out, stabs him, guy pushes back, everything kind of escalates in tension and fear immediately, and then the Federer agent makes the biggest mistake ever by shining that light torch right in Joel's face, which gives him immediate PTSD flashbacks to his moment with Sarah, which again, as an audience, we saw that happen like 40 minutes ago. We've seen Joel struggle with it. I think throughout the episode he has like little moments where you hear, I think, voices of Tommy, and he has like echoes back to that day. So he's clearly, even 20 years later, he's not over it.
Which would be,
yeah, absolutely.
And he has some pretty fucking horrible days after it.
Yeah, absolutely. And in this moment, Joel just basically goes to town on this guy's face, challenges him to the ground, and then just beats on him for a good 7-8 punches, square to the nose.
Yeah.
You're talking
it's primal rage. It's absolutely. Just blackout, just beating this guy.
Yeah, it's
way beyond. It's way beyond where he's probably dead. Probably get a good another 5 or 6 punches in after that point.
Yeah, he didn't even just disarm him. He straight up just like The only time I've seen a face worse than that is Oberyn Martell in Game of Thrones, which Pedro Pascal knows a lot about. That face ended up being smushed as well. But yeah, so Federer agent out for the count. Pardon me. Tess finds out that kind of Ellie's infected on the scanner. And what was quite interesting, I've seen a lot of people talk about this so far, is that they didn't really focus on that. Like, Tess finds out Ellie's infected. She shouts back at Joel, and she's like, Joel, she's infected. Yeah. But then because of the searchlights and the scenario they're in, like, they can't hang around. And I think in the video game, they do hang around a little bit more to talk about it, but realistically, they've just killed someone. The spotlight's out. He's already radioed it in. They need to get out of there.
I think a big part of it is to focus a bit more on Joel. Because they're trying to
Yeah.
build Joel up to be, as we've mentioned several times, like when with stuff with Sarah, when he like wrenches the old lady, it's like he has that ability to just have extreme violence in him.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been hinted at all the way through, like in the 2023 section.
Yep.
That he's done some horrible stuff. And this is the first time we kind of see that violence in him and just the raw anger in his face.
Yeah. And
so by not dwelling on this bombshell revelation of Ellie and Tess, by focusing on Joel for a bit longer, I think is a good choice.
Yeah, I do as well. And again, caught up in all the moment, they're like, right, she seems to be infected. Ellie's like, I'm not infected. Don't worry about it. And like, again, she seems perfectly together. So in the midst of all the storm, they basically just like make a beeline through the fence. And I guarantee you this will be addressed probably more for the opening of the second episode, where they get some shelter, they're out of the rain. What the hell is going on?
Yeah, when they get to the first safe house.
Yeah, and we're probably going to hear the moment like that happens in the video game where Tess and Joel have a conversation about Marlene betrayed them. Why would she set them up that way? Ellie doesn't understand why she would be part of a setup. And we kind of, again, hear both sides of the story come together. And I don't think ending on that was important. I think you're right in saying the ending of the episode was Joel Strips punching a guy to death because of his PTSD, pent-up rage, whatever way you want to take it. But they needed to get out of that.
That's the thread they've dropped to get you enticed for the next episode.
Yeah, like, oh shit, so she's infected. Joel's still clearly got bottled up anger, rage, loss, remorse, whatever. They've just escaped the quarantine zone out into this world. And then again, we do finally end the show with they climb through the fence, pans to the sign that says biologically contaminated area, nuclear radiation inspired. And then it cuts back over to the radio back in Joel and Tessa's kind of apartment building with the code. And we hear Never Let Me Down Again by Depeche Mode playing, which is, again, got a nice 80s beat synth pop to it, which was released in 1987. So according to the code, the 80s is...
Bad things happening.
Bad things happening. So Bill and Frank clearly must warn ahead of time when they do their smuggling runs. They must warn them ahead of time whether there's like a horde of clickers out there, there's loads of infected, and they give them a heads up saying, maybe put a pause on this week because it's mad out here. And so just as we see them heading off, it pans up, we see the skyscrapers leaning into each other destroyed, you hear lightning and you hear a clicker, which is probably going to be the kind of next villain introduction next week. And we're hearing an 80s song play over the credits as they kick in, and that's the end of episode 1. And that is When You're Lost in the Darkness. So, Richie, final thoughts on that episode?
It's awesome. Like, it's everything I've wanted it to be. All the changes made perfect sense while still being true to the characters and what the game's about. But when they've changed things in a way that makes it work better as a TV show rather than harms the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing I would say that actually recontextualizes things is just the lack of spores.
Yeah.
Which, that's one relatively minor thing, to be honest. Okay, yeah, it changes how it spreads. But in terms of when you're playing the game, there's a few points where the spores that become more of like a puzzle to solve rather than
it's how to get around
else.
Well, that was one of the things the director said was not the director, Neil Druckmann said that in the video game, all it really means is when you enter an area, you put a gas mask on and then you still go about everything exactly the same with guns, weapons, puzzles. But in a TV show, if you're putting a mask over them, you can't see the characters emote. You can't see anything that's going on. You can't hear them. We've all remember what Bane sounded like in Batman. It's you're kind of hampering your character's ability to act. Whereas having these tendrils,
they've probably done some like test runs or something. Probably not with Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey, etc. But with some like stand-ins, like when they're kind of like pre-production stuff. How would this look?
Yeah,
if we're doing spores and stuff, and it's like it just doesn't look right. So
absolutely, pardon me. And Jin says in the chat, so next week is why we learn out why the show is called the ClickerCast. Because we've not had clickers introduced yet. So yes, it's based on the clickers, the different stages of infection. So for those who've played the game, you guys will know it's runners, first. So when you get infected, your brain basically starts to go, but you still have a lot of mobility in your body. And we saw the runners earlier in this episode when they attack Sarah. They just straight up make a beeline for people. They see movement, they see people, and they just go all out rage towards them. They then evolve into stalkers, where their brains start to become a bit more infected. They usually have like growths coming out of their head, and these guys are. They like the dark, the shadow. They kind of are a bit more reserved.
This is the point where they're more starting to be a bit more blind.
Yeah, they can't see as well, so they kind of hide in the dark and hunt you down stealthily. Then they evolve into a clicker, which is, I think, what we will, based on the game, we'll probably see a clicker next week. That's when the fungal infection's kind of taken out the eye sockets. The whole brain has this massive growth on it, and they can't see, so they have to find people by echolocation. So they do these horrific sounding clicks, which I did see confirmed today, Richie. The clickers in the show are voiced by the same people who did the clickers in the game. So the two folks who did those,
it's
awesome.
Creepy as hell.
It is. It's creepy as hell. They're in the next one. And then finally, the final stage of it, I'm not going to spoil because we're no doubt going to. It's in the trailers, but there's a big final stage as well that we'll get to. To round out the show, episode 1 of the ClickerCast, Richie, I think a couple of things we'll introduce. Again, folks in the chat, people over in our Discord, do let us know if there's any features, any moments you like us to highlight for the show. But I think just to round out, I think it's worthwhile picking 1 or 2 moments or performances. With this being the first one, very difficult for me. But Richie, I'll throw it over to you. Performance of the week. Which of these actors did the best job? Because it's such a hard question based on this episode. I know that.
It is, but I know who I'm going to pick. I don't think there's anyone who did a bad job. I think everyone like embodied the character very, very, very well. Mm-hmm. But I'm going to go with Nico Parker and Sarah Miller.
Okay. Yeah, I think this episode, when I did the show notes before I saw it and I put together like performance of the week, I was like, oh, that'll be easy. There'll be a standout one. And when the end of the episode, I was like, oh shit, there was no one who was bad.
With Nico, she carries the first half of the episode pretty much on her own shoulders in a way that sets up the second half of the episode incredibly well.
Yeah.
Honestly, part of it is because she died. Her character dies, also, so it's like this is her one chance, potentially one more chance to get.
You can't win performance of the week next week when you're not in the episode. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
I think, Pedro Pascal did a terrific job. A shout out to Gabriel Luna as well. His voice for Tommy. Like, I didn't know when they hired Pedro and Gabriel, they were going to go with more of a like Latino influence than the video games, with them being in Texas and their kind of heritage. And
they probably just went, we want Pedro Pascal to do the role. Who fits the other characters then?
Yeah.
Based on ethnicity a bit.
Absolutely, but yeah, he just like some of the parts on the phone when he's talking to Joel, I'm like, he just straight up sounds like Tommy, from the video game, which is fantastic. And the guy who does the voice acting for Tommy is in the show as well, so he will be reprising his role as somebody different. So we will see him pop up at a later time. And I think Anatol was brilliant at Tess. Bella Ramsey, I think she was great as her introduction Ellie, but I don't feel she had as much screen time or dialogue to really get across. I think next week's episode is where we're really going to see a character kind of come to life as Tess and Joel come to terms with what they're doing with her.
Ellie and Joel haven't really spoke yet.
Other than throwing her against a wall. Yeah, they've not really had that
outside the corridor, we haven't seen any time between Ellie and Joel. Yeah. So I think that's where Bella Ramsey will come into it.
Yeah.
Probably starting next episode. Yeah. Where there's a bit more focus. Again, at the moment, she's cargo.
She's cargo in a box. I think Marlene did a good enough job, but I don't feel like she did enough to make me feel like she was like the absolute hardcore boss of a tough organization. I thought they gave her maybe a few too comedy lines, which I understand the episode needed, but like she's head of the Fireflies, and yet I felt like her own team weren't taking her seriously.
I think as a character, she needs a badass moment.
Yeah, which they could have done.
To show why.
Which in the hallway they could have done with Robert's men. Like clearly she took out a few of Robert's men and got shot in return. But yeah, in the game I feel like they give her a bit more chance to show why she's deadly serious and why she is the big boss.
But I think they want to try and keep this away from being too action focused. They want it to be more, it's more suspenseful, more horror, and showing just a massive gunfight in the corridor. Mm-hmm. Kind of maybe in the first episode, might change the tone, might make people think this is like action horror where that's not what it's meant to be. So
Yeah.
maybe there's a point later.
Well, that's it. The best
towards perhaps at the end of the series where she gets that badass moment.
Yeah, maybe, yeah, because she's not done out for now. But yeah, you're completely right with horror. Like horror has to be done subtly. Like some of the best horror movies, you don't see the antagonist for the majority of the movie. Like when you think about one of the reasons the first Jurassic Park movie, I know it's not a horror movie, but the reason that movie works so well is because you don't see dinosaurs for like 90% of the movie, especially the scary ones. They're on screen for all of a minute or two here and there, and it adds the tension. But I'm with you with Nico Parker.
Yeah, what we're trying to do in this first episode as well is kind of set the stakes a bit. So you don't want to make any character appear like overpowered, like superhero mode, which is why they don't want Joel chasing and Tess chasing down Robert and like killing 100 people in a compound to get to this one guy, because it makes them look too powerful when you actually want to make these characters look very vulnerable.
Absolutely.
So I think that's probably why they're staying away from stuff like that. So we're agreed on Nico Parker.
Nico Parker, yeah, absolutely destroyed it as Sarah Miller. Moment of the week then, Richie? Want to put that one down there as well? So we're going to have a moment of the week each episode. Again, so many big things happen, but what was the moment where you were like, fuck, this show is good?
I think there's tons of them. But I'm going towards Joel burning the kid.
Okay.
Because it's a unique moment for the show. And it establishes Joel as he is now. The Joel that... Yeah. It's just how, like, he's able to just do this basically horrific thing without even batting an eye.
Mm-hmm. Do let us know in the chat as well what you guys think. What was your best moment of the week? So you're going with that one then. So Joel, kid in the fire. I'd say my moment of the week, it has to just be the Sarah's death moment, like the build up to it. I just think even though it was almost scene for scene the game, I just think that death, even though I've watched it so many times in the game and it's made me well up so many times in the video game, seeing it played out in real life with like live action actors, it's still built up to the same level of emotion, if not more palpable than it ever has been, because I'm watching real people kind of live it, and that was just like, I think, wow.
For me, I think the reason why Sarah's death probably came in maybe second or third for me is just because I've seen it already in the games several times. So it's like, I know how this is playing out. They've done a fantastic job of it. But as someone who already knows the characters, knows the story, that's just something I knew that was going to be there.
Yeah.
The Joel burning the kid added something to the character that I wasn't expecting to see. That scene with that kid walking into Boston to Joel burning them, that was entirely new. I thought was fantastic for setting up so much stuff.
Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah. In the chat, we've got Jin saying, him killing the Feder officer. So, like, the punch scene at the end was, like, again, showcasing Joel for, like, wow, he's super strong, super aggressive, and just laser focus, like a bull seeing red. And then the final one, before we do our outro for this week's show, Richie, best game adaptation of the week. So, what for you mirrored the video game in the most respectful, like-for-like way? That you thought that was pulled straight out of the game, and I don't care because it was awesome anyway.
That's Sarah's death scene for me.
That was Sarah's death scene for you. Okay.
Yeah.
For me, then, I think it was probably the build up to Sarah's death scene, but I think the moment they got in the car, I said when we were recapping it, it was just a video game. Like, I felt like I wanted to look left and look right, and like I said, we went past Jimmy's farm, we saw the family, the couple, the dialogue between Joel and Sarah and Tommy saying like, am I ill? Like, do you need to go into the city? They took the Adlers went into the city with the old lady, and it added so much immediate context. You could hear Sarah being scared, Joel trying to explain to his daughter why Tommy was trying to figure it out at the same time, and all the while, one shot, we're just driving by, we're seeing police cars pull up, we see them go right, we see the crowds of people fleeing, and obviously they changed it a little bit by adding the plane in, but I think it just added to the energy of the whole scene. Was like, oh, like everything is going to shit right now. So for me, it was the car journey in that scene. That was the best video game like for like.
For me, the reason Sarah's death scene is purely down to the acting.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's in reality, there's not much happens in that scene. Joel's carrying Sarah, comes across not Federation, just a sort of soldier. Soldier gets some messages. Soldier shoots him. Sarah bleeds out in Joel's arm, but it's just the acting between like Joel, like Pedro Pascal, Gabriel Luna, and like not Bella Ramsey, Nico Parker.
Mm-hmm.
It's just so good.
Yeah,
it's almost line for line from the game, but in a way, I think it elevates it.
Yeah, it really does. And I think as a kind of final wrap up is I'm just thrilled that this is so good. Like we knew, like it always had the chance. Like when you've got such good source material, and such good source material that literally is cinematic as hell. Like Naughty Dog games from Uncharted and The Last of Us, they are movies in their own right. Very much like a lot of Kojima's work, but to watch that kind of transcend up to not the big screen. I mean the big screen. You know what I mean? Television. Like HBO,
how big your TV is.
I mean that's true. Yeah, let's face it. Like television quality today is leaps and bounds ahead of where it was in the 2000s and the 90s. Like it is beyond a lot of movie production qualities in some regards. The budget for some things, like look how much money went into the Lord of the Rings TV series. Like it costs more to make these shows sometimes than it does full feature length pictures. But just to have like a compilation of everything that we've knew about for nearly a decade now. To see it on the big screen, to see billboards out there in the streets, to hear our colleagues and our family who wouldn't otherwise even touch a video game talking about The Last of Us for the next 2 months. And if it's revered as well as the first episode has got off to, we are in for one hell of a ride, Richie.
Indeed.
But that is all we have time for on this week's episode of the ClickerCast, our very first show where we're not just talking about video games, but we did try and get it in there at least with a show that's based on a video game. Every week we're going to get together Tuesday live, 8 p.m. with you, the wonderful audience out there, to talk about, break down, compare, contrast, and everything else in between. The Last of Us from HBO, available on Sky over in the UK. But if you are into video games, don't forget to check out the rest of the Helix Players channel, where we have gameplays, live streams, this very Thursday, every Thursday in fact, we stream a game with you, our wonderful community. Keep it tuned and keep it locked. Enjoy the show, but more importantly, run along to the comments, stalk us on social media at Helix Plays Games, click at that notification bell, and blow to yourself on all of our other content, but above all else, endure and survive. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you next week. Goodbye.
Bye.